hope that we can impart some great knowledge today. So yeah.
Yes, so today our focus is how to prepare for a retail appointment, how to facilitate the meeting, and then what to do after the appointment to make sure that you're engaging with your buyer. So the goal of this discussion is to fully equip you with essential skills and knowledge to have successful market appointments. Christina, go ahead and take it away, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, just to let you guys know, we have received some of your questions already. So we're going to try go through as many as possible. And then as we're going through all of our topics that we've prepared for you today, if you have any thoughts in mind, like please drop your questions in the chat and then we'll try, get to as many so we can help you out as best as possible. But yeah, so Ali, let's jump into this. And first topic for today, let's talk some meeting prep. What advice can you give our brands around, this topic and preparing for any upcoming appointments that they have?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, the most important thing to do is research the retailer that you're meeting with, because every retailer has their own product presentation, their own unique position in the market. So what I would do is go to their website, check their current brand and product offerings. What are they highlighting on the front page? Are there any specific trends? Which brands do they list in their drop down? Go to the product categories that are most aligned with your aesthetic and your price range. What I like to do is filter my view by price so that I can really get a full understanding of what products they have in different price ranges. And then as you're doing that, determine where your brand fits among their mix. So note brand adjacencies, brands that they currently carry that you could see yourself sitting next to. And be prepared to bring up those examples when you actually meet with them.
Yeah, it's really important to, it's like paramount to understand the retailer that you're meeting with. You want them to almost like feel like you're part of their team, that you've done that much research, and like understand who their customer profile is, who shops with them, go stalk their social media, go look at anything you can really like find. And just come ready, I would say. But yeah.
Yeah, so also in addition to that, you of course come with your own information prepared, right? So have your key brand product information ready. So know your wholesale prices, know your retail prices, know what your markup percent is, know your minimums for production, and then of course also your lead time for production, because buyers will always be noting these and asking these questions throughout the appointment. Share where you produce your goods and whether you can land them in the country that your retailer is in. And then if you have a D2C business or you have an existing wholesale business with other retail partners, share any best sellers that you'd like to highlight. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so of course, not all of these appointments, actually more likely they won't be in person, right? With how the world is today. So what would you say, like for any like web camera appearance or virtual appointments? Like what kind of tips would you give around that?
Yeah, there are a lot of virtual appointments these days, and it can be a little tricky, right? I think, you want to make sure that you have good lighting so that you're presenting yourself and your product in the most like clear and visual way. Make sure that your background is fairly plain. Prop up your device. If you're using a phone, make sure it's like steady and propped up so that you have a good view of the room and the product. And then, if relevant, wear your brand because it'll
Yeah.
look great, right?
Yeah.
Or something neutral that goes with your
Yeah.
collection. And then, of course, just make sure you're in a quiet, interruption-free environment so that it's really all about you, your presentation of the collection, and there's no interruptions.
Yeah. So no kids and no pets around.
Right.
Yeah.
Put the pets in the other room. Send the kids to school.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. Yeah, because I guess not all brands have like, the luxury of their own studio or something, but as best as possible, make it look like it's your display room or like, yeah, a studio.
Exactly.
So like other sort of general meeting etiquette basics that you could share, Ali, what would you sort of like say? Because not everyone does like us, we work for a remote company, so we like quite used to this, but like how, like, yeah, just any insights on that?
Yeah, so if it's a virtual appointment, sometimes it can be tricky to connect with Wi-Fi or get logged into the virtual meeting, whether they're using Zoom or Teams. So always arrive early, get yourself set up, make sure you're connected, and then also come prepared with a set of questions that you want to ask. Ask relevant questions to understand that particular retailer's needs, which products they're most interested in of your collection. Ask for feedback on styling and what the fit is for their customer. And then take notes, right? Like there can be a lot of content going on. If you can have a second person there taking notes for you, that would be amazing. If not, just prepare notes so that
Yeah.
you can bring all of your action items and like deliverables after the meeting.
Yeah, what I've seen some brands do, even to like any meetings with me, they like download a personal note taker, and then it kind of like joins the meeting as like an extra person, and then it kind of records them for you so that you can like try and scribe it afterwards. So that's also like, definitely an option, because you don't want to kind of look like you're not listening to the buyer and you're like kind of taking notes over here, but you don't want to miss anything because it can be quite a whirlwind. Yeah, so I would recommend something like that. Just look into that, see what you can download, or have like an intern or someone from your team come and just take some notes. That would also be really cool. And then next thing I wanted to ask and chat to you about, Ali, is like, now it's time to present the brand, right? So what is the best sort of like how do we put the best foot forward, like in telling our story and like, yeah, explaining
Yeah,
our brand and how we started it.
exactly. I feel like that's the most important thing, right? Is what is unique about your story and your brand?
Mm.
What inspired the founder to start the brand? What is their background? When did you launch? Give sort of like tell your unique story so that you can emotionally connect with the buyer and they can understand just like
Yeah.
the meaning behind your brand, the story behind your brand. Of course, always start with what categories do you produce? Who is your customer? Do you sell only D2C or do you have the existing retail partners? If you do have partners already, share who those partners are.
Absolutely, yeah.
Buyers love to hear that, right? Sometimes they'll get FOMO if the competitors are stalking you already and they want to have some too.
Yeah, exactly. And then like I know most of the brands that we work with do have beautiful special stories. So like as you said, like that's so important, and like that will make your brand stand apart, because a lot of these retailers have like all the regulars, and like, so that's what we're doing here. We work with brands that have special stories and are from diverse backgrounds, so really like play into that. That's why these retailers have booked appointments with you or secured these slots with you, and like it's so valuable. Like buyers are so swamped, like it's really one of the most demanding jobs in the world. So they want to hear your story, so however best you can put that together, like go for it, really.
Yes, make it memorable, right?
Yeah.
Something that they can personally connect with and remember about your brand.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll be working with these retailers that are probably based in a different region to you, or different country, or, completely foreign. So like, don't assume that they understand like your background or where you're from, because I know, like, being South African, like we have so many beautiful nuances. Like share that with these retailers that wouldn't have like maybe even chatted to someone from South Africa before. So yeah, just to like, really, I'm harping on about it, but it's because I feel so passionate about that. So yeah. But moving on. So Ali, other tips that we can help ensure the presentation runs smoothly once we have told this beautiful story about who the brand is and shared their background? Like, what next?
Yeah, so now is the time to showcase your products, right? So you want to tailor your presentation of the collection based on the information you learned about them. So don't be afraid to skip styles if you think that, after what the feedback that they gave you about what works or doesn't work for them, you can like skip styles and focus on what you think is the best product fit for them. So if you're showing apparel, it's great to have mannequins or dress forms whenever possible. It's always helpful for the buyers to see the product on a
Yeah.
model or a mannequin just to see how the fabric drapes and how it
Yeah.
fits. And then, if you're in a virtual appointment, when you physically present the collection, actually hold the product up to the camera, allow room for questions during the presentation, and
Mhm.
also ask for feedback on specific styles so that you know exactly what the buyer is thinking about that style if they're not
Yeah.
forthcoming with that information. Some buyers are more talkative than others, and they'll just like tell you right away as you
Yeah, like, no,
as you're
yes,
showing.
no.
And then
Ali, would
some are like quiet, and so you have
yeah.
to ask them, for feedback.
Ali, would you like, this is so, I don't know if you've seen this, like any like brands bringing like live models, like kind of showing, is
Yes.
that, think that's worth it?
I do think it's worth it if it's possible. I think that it's buyers are so visual and they
Yeah.
want, I mean, they just like need to see it, how it would look on the customer, how it would look on their
Yeah.
website. And so, if possible, models are great.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like also for jewelry, bags, like, yeah. 100,
If
yeah.
not, a lookbook is also like a great option, right?
Cool.
Because it'll show, nice like editorial style images of your product actually on models. That's
Yeah.
good too.
And then when presenting products, what kind of things should we focus on?
Yeah, so I would focus on like key selling points. So product functionality,
Yeah.
um, customer demand and feedback. So if you already have customer demand and feedback, definitely share that. If you have any press or celebrity traction, that's great. Share
Yeah.
that. As you're going through each style, if it comes in different colors, variations of fabrics or materials, share that as well, because you may not have samples of everything, but you want to give the buyer the full view of options. What else? Oh, exclusives. Buyers.
Yeah.
So some of these big retailers
Yep.
like to do exclusives so that they
We've
have
already had some brands go through that process and it's been so exciting. Yeah.
yeah, so it allows you to connect with the buyer and
Yeah.
tailor your product to their customer needs. So maybe they love a silhouette, but they love a different fabric. Would you
Yeah.
be open to, making an
Yeah.
exclusive for them with that variation? So be flexible
Yeah.
because that's I have a point of view on your collection, but also just like allow for flexibility so that you can tailor your fit to each buyer. And then, I think composition and how it's made is also helpful. So if you source your fabrics from a specific area that's special, highlight any unique composition or quality of fabric, how it's made. I think that helps to round out and tell your full story too.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then also like if there's anything matching or sets or like how you curated your range with like what was your thinking? Like show those like paired, right? Like
Yeah, like tops and bottoms together or like a blazer and a top. Yes, show how they can be paired together because as retailers, as the buyers are looking at your collection, they're visualizing pieces that would go together, hang together in the store or be shown together on the
and
website.
yeah, so all that merchandising. And also like some brands will have like a lifestyle brand. So they'll maybe have like a few handbags, maybe some footwear, and they'll have apparel. So that's also really nice to like show what you were thinking when you like, did that range. So yeah, great. And
Yeah.
then I also get this a lot. So Ali, from your perspective, having worked with all the retailers, how many products, we don't want to do too many, too little. So what's the sweet spot of how many products we should show in a meeting?
I think the sweet spot is probably 10 to 12 styles.
Okay.
Any
Yeah.
less is probably not enough for the buyer to really get a full offering, and then
Yeah.
any more could be overwhelming for a 30-minute appointment. You wanna make sure that you're giving yourself time to go through and that you're showing, like, the best of the best.
Yeah, that makes.
Um, 10 to 12.
Yeah, and then they could,
Yeah.
like a brand could always upload the rest of their products onto their like digital showroom, and their lookbook and line sheet will have everything. So yeah.
You could
Okay.
also have, like, a backlog of stuff ready to show depending on how the meeting goes, right? So maybe you
Yeah.
have, like, your 10 to 12 styles that you're planning to show, and then as questions get asked, you could, like, pull things in,
Yeah.
just, like,
Yeah.
if on a whim, if you feel like it's the appropriate, item for that buyer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good idea.
Okay, so once you're done showing the product, I know, Christina, you, as a buyer, tell us what
Yeah.
kind of questions should the brand ask after that? Like, what kind of questions do we ask the buyer to make sure that we understand how they do business, what they're looking for? What are like the top questions?
So like as you said, like some buyers are going to be super vocal and like give you something to work with, whereas
Mhm.
others might be a bit like poker face. So I think if if they kind of not showing you what they're thinking, ask them. I like, what products are you most interested in? And then gauge, like go from there. And then what would your typical like order quantity be? And then you can obviously like gauge, is that something you're able to take on? And get the kind of, feel for that. You can also like throw in questions about what is the typical amount of styles they would take on from a brand for like their first run, like when they're kind of in that testing phase of your brand, like what would that look like? You can then also ask, if you're going to move forward, when would you ideally be looking to place an order from point of the meeting, so that you can have that in mind, and then also when you can follow up. And then yeah, what is the delivery window for that retailer? What are the payment terms? That's usually quite important to our brands that are needing to, fund this. And then also very important, like packaging requirements. That's really, really important, especially with some of the like bigger enterprise retailers. Those requirements are very specific. So like make sure that you understand that, and can your factory or your manufacturer like carry out those requirements?
And I would
Um,
say to that point, because they're so specific, each retailer typically has a guide that
yeah.
explains all of that. So I would just ask for the guide, right? Where they can send like the vendor setup guide that includes all of the packaging and shipping requirements, but just make sure that you're getting that information so that you can pad your timeline to make sure you're accounting for those things, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like in that sort of like on like onboarding vendor doc, you should be able to also like see, is there anything about EDI, because that's sometimes important. So,
Mhm.
like even thinking about getting your brand set up on EDI, being compliant with that, like, is a good idea. Just like raising that now while we in this. Yeah, and then of course, like just to kind of make sure that you know what the next steps are. You don't want to close off the meeting and then be like, oh, I didn't actually ask, like, what would the next like steps be in the process of stocking with this retailer? Like, just get kind of like a feel for what the outlook would be. Yeah.
Yep. All good. I agree.
That's a lot of things to ask, but they'll
I,
probably have some of those things like in your chat, but just in case you don't get that. And then like I also know like most of these meetings are around the 30-minute mark.
yeah.
Because as we said, buyers are super busy. They've got other like, brands to see and their product to maybe develop. But how would we structure this meeting to make sure that we're getting all of this in? If it is 30 minutes, like that's quite
Yes,
tough.
I know. It is 30 minutes. It's usually not longer. And I would say be very conscious of your buyer's time because they may be like back to back to back appointments. So use your 30 minutes wisely. So
Yeah.
I mean, you always start with introductions. So give 2 minutes for introductions, let them introduce themselves, you introduce yourself, but then another 2 to 3 minutes to fully tell your brand story, right? And
Yeah.
then, of course, the bulk of the appointment, I would say a full 20 minutes should be dedicated to the actual collection presentation and questions, right? And then at the end, allow for 2 to 3 minutes for you to answer the questions that you need to ask. And then any closing information and next steps. So 5 minutes at the beginning for introductions and introducing your brand and your story,
Yeah.
20 minutes for product presentation, and then another 5 minutes at the end for closing information, questions, and next steps.
Yeah. And also like remember you're talking to like creatives. So like pull it. Well, I mean, you're gonna be, you're a creative too, they're creative. So like pull it back, just keep trying to pull it back so that you can make sure you get through everything. We don't want to go off in tangents. And in time, you're gonna build that reputation with that retailer and that buyer. So hopefully they're gonna get to know you really well. But yeah, just keep pulling it back to keep on track. And then what else can we like talk about? So yeah, like those expectations, I think like post meeting, Ali,
Mhm.
like what kind of, what's the usual with the retailers that you work with now at the Folklore? Like, yeah, what are those expectations?
Yeah, so best practices is to always send a nice thank you email within like 24 to 48 hours, right? Like, thank you so much for meeting with me. It was such a pleasure. Bring up something personal or something that you talked about in the meeting. And then also in your follow-up email, you can reference that you're working on preparing like any of the requested materials that they asked for.
Yeah.
So that could be finalized line sheets and pricing. That could be assortment suggestions based on questions or feedback that they had. That could be lookbooks so that they could see like a full presentation of your images. And
Exclusively?
then say it again.
Exclusives, maybe, if there was any
Oh,
talk about that.
exclusives. Yeah. So if you talked about exclusives, yeah, provide fabric swatches, CADs, whatever to
Yeah.
piece together that look that they were asking for. Um, reiterate order deadlines to make sure that you understand what their deadlines are so that you can plan on your side. And then any additional notes and questions that they had that you're following up on. Just a really nice, short, sweet recap so that you are both on the same page and you basically are recapping everything for them so that they feel like confident that you all are on the same page about what you discussed.
Yeah, and I also think it like builds that reputation, right? So it's like you are so committed to this partnership that getting back to them as promptly as possible
Mhm.
and being reliable. Like that's the number one thing that like we always tell brands is like over communicate, be as prompt as possible with like, any responses and questions that buyers have. Yeah, super, super important. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. Cool. So Ali, I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to add in terms of like best practices, but I know we saved some time to talk through some things that our amazing brands have sent through prior to the webinar.
Yeah,
But
let's
yeah,
answer some questions.
there's some questions. Okay, cool. So let me go to those. So thank you guys for being proactive and sending those through. Um, So yeah, so do buyers make immediate orders? So meaning like I guess in that like actual meeting, this particular brand is actually located in Asia. So they can't readily meet international retailers in person, which I think we did kind of, chat about, like virtual appointments are so common nowadays. But yeah, what is kind of like the expectation with like order if you were to get an order? Like how quickly does that happen?
So buyers typically provide their orders within 2 to 3 weeks after the appointment. So
Yeah.
they're not sitting in the appointment writing everything down and in the moment. They typically like have their
Yeah.
appointments with most brands, collect their information, and then digest it and make decisions after the fact. So they typically issue their final orders or give you like bulk orders to give you an idea of what they're thinking 2 to 3 weeks after the appointment. And then the lead time for shipping is generally months later, right? So for the February market, the ship dates won't be until like August.
Yeah.
So, and that's something that could vary by buyer, by retailer, and question that you definitely want to ask to make sure you understand their specific timeline.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's like always like from a buyer's perspective, it's super you know, like it's a very long process, like getting any brands like signed off, like new brands that you're going to be like adding in. So it's definitely not like a in the moment thing. It will be a like, of course, the fact that they like are open to engage with you and to like hear about your brand, they're thinking about it, they have budget for it, and there is potential, but it's definitely not a, yeah, it's not a, oh yes, like online shopping, let's go thing. It's, you know, it is something they'll need to get signed off by their manager, their buying department, like head or merchandising manager. So yeah, it will take a little bit of time, but not too long, 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, so next question that we have that came in, Ali, that we can discuss. What's the best sort of way to go about understanding the individual needs of the retailer?
So I think we touched on this a little bit, which
Yeah.
is doing your research. As you know, research on each retailer will give you a better understanding of their product assortment, the brands that they currently carry. You can also do research about the company to see, you know, like where they are from a financial standpoint. Companies typically um, release their end of year information in Q1 so that you can see like what their fiscal business updates are and insights into customer behavior or categories that they're going to focus on. But of course, like the specifics that you really are going to get a lot of value from are questions that you ask the buyers in the appointment because it will vary by category and it will vary by retailer.
Yeah. Agreed. Cool. So another question, what are the current trends in the retail industry that are impacting buying decisions?
I think that one's a little bit more general. I think that each specific retailer and buyer has different impacts to their business, right? And so each what we've seen is we do like our pre-market check-ins with every buyer for our retail partners. They
Okay.
all have different feedback on what is working and not working for their business, right? What they're going after, where they see opportunity, and what the trends are. Because trends for, you know, denim or women's ready to wear will be different than the trends for men's footwear, right? And so I think that really asking those questions based on your brand and the buyers that you're speaking with is going to give you the most insight that's going to be meaningful for you.
That makes sense. And what specific criteria do buyers prioritize when selecting products for their retail stores? I think you're gonna have a similar kind of answer to that one, right?
Well, I would say, you know, the first thing they look at is product styling, right? Does this product have the styling that I feel is good for my customer? And then the second thing is pricing. Does it have the right price value equation for my customer? Does it
Yeah.
fit, you know, does it fit amongst my brand mix? Is it something that's working for me, or do I see it as, is it filling a hole in my assortment where, you know, maybe I don't have this kind of product right now, or maybe I want to expand this price category. So I think styling and pricing is like number one and number two most important things that buyers will look for.
Yeah. And also, like, often brands will ask me, like, is my product too expensive or too cheap? And like that's again, it's like exactly like the value equation, and like, is your markup making sense? You know, there's like that sweet spot too that buyers usually work with. But yeah, like looking at go and do your competitor analysis, like we said in the beginning, go and see who are the featured brands, like what is this like pricing strategy, like understanding that. I think that is definitely like of course, each retailer is going to have a completely different price strategy. So yeah. Another
I think there
question.
was, sorry, quickly,
Yeah.
I want to address another question in the chat, which is for anyone new to wholesale, what is a market appointment and what happens during one. So we talked about market appointments are basically when you meet with a buyer to show your collection, right? So I think we talked about all the details of that, but let's like step back and make sure that everyone fully understands that a market appointment is when you are meeting one-on-one with a buyer or a retailer, showing your collection for a particular buying period or season.
Yeah. Sorry, we like, yeah, exactly. Just went straight into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Ali, for that one. I've got another question over here to ask. We can discuss. So, how flexible generally are buyers with pricing negotiations, and what strategies work best during these discussions?
I would say you should always be prepared to negotiate, but you may not always have to. I think having a solid knowledge of how your pricing compares with other brands that are relevant in the space is important. And then also, of course, calculating your costs to make sure that, all of the costs that you would incur to get the goods made and shipped before confirming the wholesale costs is very important. You need to work backwards to make sure that you are building in all of the pricing costs that you need to cover the goods and still remain profitable.
Yeah.
But retailers will also need to be profitable, and they typically look for like 50% to 60% markup from
Yeah.
wholesale to retail price. So your prices should be competitive with other brands in your space, especially as an emerging brand, but also take into account all of your costs in order to remain profitable. Yeah.
And what key elements should be emphasized when presenting products to retail buyers? I think we did, we can just maybe run through that once more. What are the types of things we should bring up?
So key elements when presenting products. So your pricing, right? Pricing is super important. Best sellers that you can highlight, lead time for production, how long it takes for you to ship the goods, what your production capacity is. So what are your minimum order quantities? And then what is your logistic capacity? So how can you ship the goods? Can you land the goods in the US or wherever your retailer is located?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, so
I'm
now
gonna
should we
go
maybe have a
ahead. Yeah. Let's
there's
look at the questions in the chat.
yeah,
So
yeah,
one question, Christina.
yeah.
If you're new to wholesale, but have the opportunity to participate in a trade show, what's the best way to approach buyers if you don't have a set appointment already?
Okay, cool. So if you have the opportunity, okay, so you are participating in a trade show. Awesome. So so that's of course like just how you position yourself, right? So I think if the buyers are going to be attending that trade show that you particularly want to, meet with and hopefully get a chance to engage with, make sure that you have all your information together and try get the best contacts for those buyers so that you can invite them to come and view your stall or your station where you'll be. Yeah, and I think just like writing a compelling sort of like story about why they should come and see you, that could be really great. And then some buyers avail themselves, like they might be like, I'm here for 3 days, and then they might like send out like their availability, so then you could maybe book a time with them if that's how they operate. But yeah, I would say the best is just to send like some outreach and to kind of see where your buyers are going to be that sort of time frame. And then of course uploading your showroom with the Folklore and sharing that with your the buyers that you want to meet with, and sharing your unique referral code so that they can come and view what you've got. So making sure your showroom's up to date, making sure your website all correlates, and you're ready to sort of go. And also advertising on your socials and your website that you're going to be at these trade shows. that's important to market yourself. So that needs to be part of your strategy. Ali, anything to add there? You work with the buyers.
No, I think you covered everything. I think that's it.
Cool.
I do see a question about samples. So how do you recommend we handle samples if requested? Is that a cost of doing business? And I request return of samples? I think that's a really good question. Because you're most likely having virtual appointments in most cases, right? Samples are very important. I would recommend having a couple of sets of samples, if at all possible, like 2 sets potentially. You It is a cost of doing business. You have to be able to provide samples so that buyers can touch and feel the product before they write an order. And then, yes, they will return samples. I would say in most cases, they are very used to returning samples. Absolutely.
Yeah. Then we have another question, with sales agents, how to negotiate the best percentage with brands as sales agents. So as a sales agent, that's a tough one because, of course, like we said, like all the, so I'm not sure if the person asking the question is a sales agent or you're asking like in reverse. So yeah, it just adds to your cost, right? So that'll be something that you'll either need to factor in as part of your like running costs, your operations, and like your marketing almost. But sometimes they set those like percentages that sales agents might ask. So I think do your research, do your homework. Is that going to be the most rewarding sort of like route for you to go to use a sales agent? Or would it be something like participating in showrooms or the folklore? Yeah, so I think that's something, it's difficult to say how to negotiate with a sales agent because sometimes it's based on the sale, the order, like the order value. Yeah, Ali, anything to add on there?
No,
Yeah,
I think that's good.
Let's see. What is the average MOQ required by the bigger retailers? I think that's also varies, right, Ali?
It does. We typically say if you have the capacity to produce about 50 units per month, that's usually covers it. But those are questions that you should definitely ask the buyer because it could depend on the product, right?
I was going to say that too, like, yeah, jewelry versus like apparel might be a very different MOQ that they, or like order, yeah, they would be writing. Let's see.
How many buying seasons are there? And what are the timelines? It feels like buyers are always in market. It does feel like that.
Yeah, it
It
does.
does.
And what's also funny is that obviously it's in reverse when you're in the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. So yes, there's always like right now, South Africa, or like I'm just thinking would be buying the opposite season. So it's interesting. But yeah, they are.
So there are typically four in
Yeah.
fashion categories. There are typically 4 seasons per year. There are 2 mainline collections. There is in February, you typically show your fall mainline collection. And in August, you would typically show your spring mainline collection. And then there could be a pre-spring or pre-fall and holiday in between those 2 seasons. But not all buyers buy all 4 seasons. And if you're doing accessories or other categories that don't have a seasonal, like as seasonal business, more continuous, then you could be showing during different periods of the year.
Yeah. And then some retailers, have a different like strategy where they'll often like be open to testing new brands, like regardless of, yeah, a little bit out of those typical timelines. So always be ready. But yeah, those are the major ones in the calendar. When the retailers are testing products, are they testing online or in their shop? Good question. Both. So some retailers will have a strategy where they only test online because it's like less risky for them to like put product in certain stores because then they won't know if they're getting the right read on something. Is it just because of where it's placed? Others won't. They might do online exclusives, or they might do in-store exclusives. It's a mix. But sometimes they might put it on both. It just depends on what they're trying to test, because there might be different aspects of, like, it's not necessary only to test your brand. They could also be testing like a new product type or a new category, and your product might be part of that test. So yeah, it varies. Let's see, how small of a new brand is appealing to work with? Ali, do you want to take a stab? So like how, like, would it be appealing to work with a small brand? That's, I think, how I'm reading the question. Like, how new, like, how open are retailers willing to work with like a new brand? Like, I think that's kind of what the question is.
If I fully understand, I think so. All of the brands that are doing business with retailers on our platform, particularly today,
Yeah.
are new. A lot of them
Yeah.
had never done wholesale business before.
Yeah.
And so retailers are definitely open to working with emerging designers. It's all about just making sure that you have the production and shipping capabilities to do
Yeah.
business with that retailer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a lot of the, like retailers, they do like it, right? If you do have some kind of wholesale experience, just because then it's like less risky, I guess, because then they're like, oh, cool, they've done this before, like, but it's not, yeah, it's definitely not always the case. And I would say, like, just having a few years behind you just solidifies that you've, like, done your due diligence, you've got a bit of experience, you've run into some failures and learned from them. So retailers are happy to, yeah, consider that. But I don't think there's
Also,
like,
some of these big retailers have like mentorship and support programs for emerging designers or diverse brands. And so that will definitely not be a prohibitor to doing business with a small brand, right?
yeah,
They are looking to grow their business with smaller brands or with diverse owned brands, and they will provide more support and help with their setup process, with their shipping process, and with their payment terms in order to accommodate small brands.
yeah, that's really great. And then this is a good one. So like for like a brand that's not based or is based in the US, but wants to sell to like Europe or the UK, how would they kind of look at like creating those landed prices? Like, how do you like work around the currency exchange? Is it important? Like, Ali, we work in US dollars. Like, that's kind of how the folklore just like kind of, we keep it quite standard. But like, yeah, if we work in other currencies, like what's the best practice around that? Like, do buyers mostly, yeah, are they open to
You
anything other?
definitely want to show pricing in the retailer's currency, right? So if you're talking to a European retailer, you want to show your prices converted to euro with that currency exchange accounted for. And if you're talking to a US retailer, you want to show it in USD and so on. I think what we should do is follow up with some of these questions and more details, maybe, Kinsola, in our follow up, because pricing can be more detailed and complex, and I think we can send some more detailed answers afterward.
That sounds really good. Yeah, we could sit here for me, all night and discuss these topics. It's so great. It's really, wonderful to engage with the brands in such like a, yeah, open setting. And with you, Ali, I love chatting with
Yes,
you.
such great questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You may follow up with questions as well, and we'll do our best to answer. And we will be sending a recording, right, Christina? A recording
Yep,
of the webinar and follow-up documentation with all of the points that we covered so that you have a tip sheet to take with you.
absolutely. That sounds great. And yeah, good luck for the upcoming market, guys. I hope that it's a great one. And yeah, hopefully see you in all these big retailers around the world.
Yes. Thank you
Cool.
so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.